Dean. Welcome back to This Is Horror.
Well, thanks for having me there again. I think your show is actually misnamed. I find it a very disconcerting show, but I've never found it horrifying.
So then we might have to rebrand to This Is Disconcerting, but I'm not sure that it would kind of get the readers that we want into the show. It's a much larger niche, or a
I,
much smaller niche.
I think a large part of the world is disconcerted almost continually. But I get your point about genre audience, so we'll stay with this. I will stay with it. I'll allow it to be stayed with.
So we are recording this at the start of the year in 2026. So I'm wondering, do you make or have you ever made New Year's resolutions?
I was just asked that, and I said that I was going to resolve. How did I put this? I was going to resolve to enter the new year with less concern about events and with a kind of goofy optimism. And I've so far failed to do that, but it's I unfortunately watch the news, and so it's hard to be goofily optimistic when you do.
Yeah, I mean, the news doesn't typically bring with it optimism. It's never really, this is the good news. This is doom and gloom. These are all the bad things that have been happening in the world.
Well, of course, the media always has admitted if it bleeds, it leads. So I think they long ago determined that the more negative it is, the more people are interested in it, which I don't know what that says about our species, but actually I do know what it says, but I don't want to contemplate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in terms of the kind of depravity and the morbid nature of our species, that leads us quite nicely into the friend of the family, your brand new book. And so I want to know, what was the story genesis and what was your why behind writing this novel?
Uh, this is one of those that the character popped into my head with no story whatsoever at the start. And that happened with Odd Thomas, which ended up an 8-book series. This will not. I'm 80 years old, so I don't foresee 8 more books related to this story. But when the character came to me, somebody who, it's this young woman, we meet her when she's 17, and she spent her whole life since she can remember as a very young child in a carnival freak show. The book is set in the 30s and until 1944. And she came to me. I've always been interested in carnivals, and I was once quite interested in the concept of freak shows. I used to actually get a magazine that was published in Canada that was where people qualifying for that term to get work in what were called 10-in-1s in the carnival business, 10 human oddities in each tent. They ran advertisements in a Canadian magazine published for that purpose. And I had a subscription to it for a while, and it was rather, well, I guess, disconcerting to look at who some of the people were looking for that work. So that's always been in my background. And you don't know when something you fed into this strange mind of yours suddenly brings forth something. But this character came to me, and I thought about this story of somebody who, at the age of 17, in a life of deep humiliation, is rescued from it and has the opportunity to lead not only a normal life, but a normal, amazing life in a family with considerable resources. And after that, the story just sort of started shaping itself. When I delivered it, I wasn't sure what my agents and my publisher would say, but my publisher came back and just loved the book, thought it was quote unquote beautifully written. I don't think they're snowing me. I think they actually believe that. And as a consequence, it's about all I can say. The story told itself as it went. Not that I didn't have to write it down, not that it wasn't as hard as it always is, but it wasn't anything I had to say, now, what happens with this person? It just was one of those that flowed.
Yeah, once again, you have written a book that is enormously difficult to classify, but I think I would say this is perhaps your most emotional and tender book. And of course, there is horror within it. There's certainly horror of circumstance. There's a little bit of comedy as well. I think that is always going to occur in your books. But at its core, it is a very moving and poignant piece. It is a piece about humanity, about families, both those that we're born into and the families that we create or seek out. So I'm wondering, how did you strike the balance with this one when you were writing such a tender book, but also getting in those moments of suspense and horror?
It's, as I've often said when somebody says to me, why do you write suspense novels? And why do you write this little scary factor in them? And I'm sure I've said to you too, because suspense is one of the key elements of human existence. We don't know what's happening to us tomorrow or an hour from now, or in fact, right here on this program. We're at different places rather remotely, so you can't attack me, but it could be a verbal attack. So I never know what's about to happen, and neither does anyone else. And that was sort of how I kept the balance. It was, I did concern myself that, I didn't want it to become a sentimental book in the sense that it's phony in that regard. There's so much in the way of human suffering within it that I don't think it can go there. But it was something that concerned me. And then I don't think I told you this before. Maybe I did when I was on before. My wife is my first reader always, and she's the best and toughest critic I've ever had. So she doesn't read manuscript and then come into the office and tell me how brilliant I am, or at least that's not all that she told me. And I know how long it takes her to read a book, so I gave her this manuscript at 6 o'clock on a Friday morning and figured she'd finish it by noon on Saturday. And noon came and she didn't show up in my office. Then it was 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And I began to sweat because I knew the book was somewhat different. And then I heard pots and pans banging around the kitchen. And I went out. She was beginning to think about preparing dinner. And I looked at her. I said, well, what about the book? And she said, for the first time in all these years, I don't know how to talk about it. And that didn't sound good to me. And I said, what is wrong with it? And she said, well, I needed 2 boxes of Kleenexes to read this novel. And I thought, yes, that is part of the reaction I want you to have. So it turned out we did end up talking about it. And it was... we didn't get divorced, so it's yet another triumph in my career.
Although it seems that she also was exhibiting suspense by delaying giving you that reaction.
And she knows well how to create suspense, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, goodness, in terms of the emotional core and that reaction from your wife, I mean, as with a lot of Dean Koontz books, it seems like it might be going in one direction. You're seeing a leader being rescued by the Fairchild family, only to find actually expectations have been inverted because it may well be that a leader is the one who is there to rescue them. So, when did you know this would form part of the story?
Only as it happened. It's sort of always that way, but in this one, very much so. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but All I knew is that aside from, uh, just to fill in the audience here a little bit, this family that encounters her, it's the 1930 prohibition is underway, and the people find her, the couple find her, are very successful, relatively young people who made their money in silent films and were now coming into the sound age in film just around this time. And they're looking for a new background to make a movie in. And they think of speakeasies as being a very interesting background they haven't dealt with before. And they go to the speakeasy in San Diego that was one of the upper crust speakeasies. There were speakeasies that were very upper scale nightclubs with orchestras and novelty acts and all of that. And people showed up in tuxedos and whatnot. And this couple goes in expecting, not quite knowing what to expect, but in part thinking it's simply this. But this carnival man who runs this 10-in-1, in which Alita is one of the exhibits, and she's normal from the neck up, but from the neck down, everything is very different. And he has found a secondary source of income. When the carnival goes into its off season, he moves her around to a series of very upscale speakeasies. And it's at one of these in San Diego that this couple walks in and sits down expecting one thing. And when this opening act of this girl and this guy, they become incensed, and they go backstage afterward to confront him, and they end up buying her. And she's not quite sure what this is going to mean, but as it turns out, it means they want to take her in as another of their own children. And that we're not done with the awful man who has done this to her, as you might expect. He's too villainous to let go. I had to bring him in to the story later on. But now I'm not sure I answered your question, but that won't be the first time.
Well, I mean, as long as you give an interesting response, that's how these things go. And I mean, in terms of it taking part at a carnival, or at least to begin with, taking part in that carnival environment, have you had a lot of experiences going to carnivals? Were there particular carnivals that came to mind? And indeed, with the villainous Captain Farnham, what kind of influences were there and inspirations on his character?
Well, I grew up across the highway from the county fairgrounds. And as I've spoken of before, I had a very difficult childhood with a violent alcoholic father, pretty deep poverty. And the carnival that came right across the highway usually it was August, and it would come for a week. And that was this colorful, different world altogether. And because I lived so close to the fairground, I knew all the ways to break into the fairground, where the holes in the fence were. The fairground backed up to a forest. There were all kinds of places you could climb a tree and jump over the fence. So I spent the week on the midway and hanging around and looking at things, and became very fascinated with the carnival. And I'm very full of carnival lore now, a little bit of which I have used, I think, in this book. But I've written about carnivals before. I wrote a book called Twilight Eyes. And I did a novelization early in my career of a carnival story called The Funhouse. And when I was a boy at a certain age, I dreamed of running away with the carnival. And in those days, you probably could have done it. Carnivals were very much still at that time outside the normal channels of the law. The local law would always get paid by the people in the carnival to allow the hoochie coochie shows be more than they would have been allowed otherwise. many of the game shows, the game concessions were rigged, so they were fake gambling. Actually, probably pretty close to Las Vegas today, and so some of that had to be bought away. And so I think you probably could have gotten away with disappearing into the carnival, but I would have broken my mother's heart, so that would have never happened. And but I was fascinated with the carnival. They were all outcasts, and I always felt of myself as an outcast. But when they got together within the carnival world, this community of outcasts were not outcasts to one another. They belonged in this world. And they got their own traditions, their own way of doing things. And I found all that very fascinating, and it has fascinated me to this day. So I doubt I'll write another novel set in the carnival, but I wanted to do one more. And I always knew, I didn't know what, but I knew that the character of Alida was going to prove to be something more than just freakish, that she was going to be something she didn't even know she was. And that is where all I knew of her and the way it developed was always a little bit of a surprise to me. As for Captain Farnham, there's some of my father in Captain Farnham. He's full of stories about his past and her past, but probably nothing you would ever hear from Farnham would be the truth.
And despite there being some of your father and family history in there, there was no mention of outhouses, which while I was looking at your blog in preparation for this, you started, I'm not even sure how you do this, but with your blog, you'll start talking about one thing and then it's like, so you could buy my book. And it's like, how did we even arrive here? But I was very entertained to hear that your grandfather, I believe, had built two toilets outside, even though nobody ever used two. And this idea that, like, the richer you were meant there were more toilets, even though it would become functionally
Well,
less useless. I'm not sure why I've brought this up, other than you brought it up in your blog. So I thought we're going here in the conversation.
now, first of all, let me back up and say that monthly newsletters, my publisher that I've been with now for 12 books wanted me to write. Well, actually, what they said is authors aren't required to write their own newsletters. We can do that for you. And I said, no, I don't want anyone else writing something that thinks, and then it goes out there and everybody thinks I wrote it. I said, first of all, I think many of my readers know me well enough to identify the fake newsletter like that. And so I will write this, even though it's something of a little bit of a chore. And I've changed it as it's gone on. I made it amusing. I always said also, I'm not a hard sell kind of guy. I wrote one that was a joke, hard sell, several months ago. But I said, I'm not quite sure what I'll write about, but the selling the book will always come very late in the newsletter. And at some point, it started to be about biography and telling little stories of family events that I find particularly amusing, which is almost everything. I have said before, the stuff that was terrible to endure sometimes and that was embarrassing or whatever, if you get enough time to pass, yeah, it all was pretty funny. You just didn't recognize it at the time. And I didn't know what I was going to write next. So I sat down and I thought, I'll start out writing about the fact we didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 11. And it was true that the outhouse my grandfather built to go along with this house was, the outhouses are basically shacks that sit in the backyard. But it had two holes in the seat. And I was always fascinated at that because I thought, and I say in the newsletter what I said to my grandfather why did you do this? Now, it was true that my grandfather fancied himself a home builder, but if you'd ever seen the homes he built, you know that he was delusional. They did stand up, but that was just about all that he really required of them. He was a very sweet man. He was just like a lot of people in my family. There was something a little off about him, and that was one of the things that he thought he could build houses. And as I say in the thing, I think he took pride in the fact that he put 2 seat holes in it. And when I asked him, he said, well, it was for emergencies, which fortunately the family never had such an emergencies where we had to share the outhouse together. But I was very happy when we got an indoor bathroom. I was 11 years old. And prior to that, it was something you get used to, but the freezing in the winter and the spiders in the summer were not conducive to getting the function that you're looking for to work right. That's the best way I can say it.
Can you confirm whether you have built a little outhouse on your property as a tribute to your grandfather?
No, I haven't done that. And, you know, Michael, I can think of no one else I know who would even suggest it but you. And so that's why I come back on this program.
I did think as the question materialized in my mind, am I really going to ask Dean Koontz this? And I thought, yeah, I am. This is, we get, or I say we, like I'm making Bob an accomplice in this. I get to the root of these important questions. So I'm glad everyone can rest easy because it is a vast property that you live on. So, maybe there is a secret outhouse, but you've confirmed there is not.
I suppose if I build it, I could hang his picture in it as a tribute. I could even name it after him above the door. I don't know. I'll take this under advisement with my wife, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay. that seems like a sensible idea. And, from past conversations, I think your wife typically reins in some of the more absurd ideas. So it is probably for the best. The marriage is working out so far.
Yes, 59 years. I'm not sure I'd call them absurd ideas. I think they're colorful, but I just delivered the text for the newsletter for this month, and it tells the story of how, fire that was threatening our neighborhood. I went on our roof to water it and fell off. It's quite an interesting story in its own. So you'll probably want to look into that, and you'll probably try to encourage me to climb back on the roof again if I know you, but that won't work after having fallen off a fairly high roof.
Yeah, I imagine most people who interview you, normally to promote your books, don't go to the level of reading your blogs and then framing a question around it. But again, this is the treatment that you're going to get here. And so to move back to the book, there's not a much bigger contrast than having the carnival world to then showbiz and movie making. So was that part of the appeal of writing about the Fairchilds and having them have this kind of exuberant life?
I wanted to put her in a place so different from where she'd been that it would bring out all the best in her and raise the stakes so high for the reader that you worry, oh my God, she just survived 17 years of this. Now, is this a false promise? Is it going to slip out from under her? And there are many readers who will think of that, and that adds that suspense quality to it. Furthermore, it's the fish out of water thing is always an interesting thing to read in a character is how will she negotiate this, and how will they negotiate having her in their life. That always adds a level of texture to a story like this that has always appealed to me as a reader. And then, as I knew that there was something about her that was going to bring us into that sort of magical territory, because I consider this book really a book of magical realism, as sometimes called. Then I wanted to see how that would play out in the lives of other people. So it was also, I felt that period of time in America was a very interesting time, the 30s to 1944, Prohibition, music was changing, the movies were new but were already changing. War was coming, war had just ended, and it added so much, many elements to think about and write about that I felt it was a story that I could do stuff I hadn't done before. And I loved having to research so much. I mean, early in the book, somebody plucks a Kleenex out of the box, and I had to come to a screeching halt mid-sentence and say to myself, were the Kleenex in 1930? And then I go to Linda and drop all this research stuff on her, and she goes, oh, no. But yes, there were. I invented that in 1927. But that added an element that I enjoyed. It was thinking through, keeping it consistent with the time. And then that brought me to the point of thinking, oh, I could occasionally bring in a character, a real life character here from the movie business and have a moment with them. So I was able to bring in Groucho Marx in a couple of moments and speak of other people whom I've had a lot of experience in Hollywood, so I have had the desire to admire Hollywood types burnt out of me forever. But I know enough about some of the ones from that period. They were rather admirable and interesting people, and Groucho Marx was certainly one of them. So it was fun being able to do that as well.
I'll say that whenever I started reading it, I'm like, okay, she's going from rags to riches. But we are reading a Dean Koontz novel. So what nefarious plans do the Fairchilds have? That was my initial thought. I was like, these people are going to be devious. They're going to be worse than, she's going to beg to go back into the carnival. That's what this book's going to be about. And I was wrong. I'm kind of glad I was wrong, because the story was not as I anticipated. And it became something that was very emotional and tender and quite entertaining.
Well, it's thank you, and that's her first thought in the car as she's allowed herself to be given to these people. She has a moment where she's wondering, what is their motive here besides what seems to be? Because what seems to be seems impossible, but I realized even though I didn't know where the story was going, is that was what a lot of people would expect, and therefore it couldn't be what really happened in the story. So I'll leave it there. I won't spoil my own story.
Mm-hmm. It reminded me of reading accounts and, of course, seeing the film of Joseph Merrick and the Elephant Man, and how the doctor, there's some parallels there. Alita had probably a little bit better life than Merrick had, but the humanity of both these people, Merrick and Alita, is what this story is ultimately about. It's about, not appearances, but what's inside your spirit and, your intellect and your heart.
Yeah, that was the intention here. It's because I think I've said, I talked about publicly that we have worked for 35 years or more with this group called Canine Companions for Independence that provides assistance dogs for people with severe disabilities. And I can remember years ago, I think probably 34 years ago when we were first working with them. And we went to a full weekend where it was all Canine Companions events down in San Diego at that time. And we met probably 200 people with severe disabilities, including children and adults and children in these big, difficult wheelchairs that are totally powered because they have very little use of their hands. And what took me, I was also head of a writers group at that time. And all I was hearing was complaints from the members of the organization. And we escaped and we went to this place where all these people had these really serious problems. And I never heard from any of them one complaint, one line of negativity about their lives. They were all geared up to make more of their lives and to do what they could to get better. And there was much laughter and ebullience through this weekend. Then I came home and there were 49 complaints on my answering machine at that time from writers who are members of this group whining about what their agents had done and what their publishers had done. And I listened to all of these and with growing dismay. And when I got to the end, I said to Judah, there's not one complaint that anyone has made here that I haven't had happen to me in my work with agents and publishers. None of this is unusual. None of it is life-changing. And I quit as president of the organization because I said, okay, I've had enough of this. And then when I quit, I was doing the newsletter. I didn't put my outhouse stories in that newsletter. It seemed inappropriate. But I said, look, I love you, you're all wonderful, but get a grip. Here's where I was on the weekend. Here's the kind of people I saw the problems we had. Not one complaint. And here you are complaining about some little thing your agent has done or something your publisher has done that they do all the time to everybody. And it's just the way the world works. So, just don't let all these little things bother you because you'll destroy your own life. Get a sense of humor about it and just plug forward and put that in a newsletter and send it out. I have to say, much to my dismay, I got numerous responses saying that my problem with my agent is just as bad as that person who had no legs. And I've had to say, no, actually, that's not true. Having no legs is a lot worse than having a problem with your agent. So that was my time on that. So I wanted to, I've thought about that often over the years, and I wanted to really write a novel about what I had seen in working with this group, and that is that it's in the dedication of the book, actually, that every life has meaning because every life, if lived properly, can uplift others. And that's sort of what I was attempting to do in this book, because they uplift her, but she uplifts them. And there you go. And so that was where the kernel, the seed of the story was the desire to write a story that way, that was about that.
Yeah,
Well,
there
that got
seems to
very
be
serious there.
no, not at all. And there does seem to be a tendency almost that the more comfortable someone's life is, the more that they complain about just the petty and the mundane and the things that in the grand scheme of things don't matter. But when you have real, almost life-threatening or life-altering trouble, there's almost no time to complain, and you have to find the light. You have to find that little semblance of joy, because that's kind of what's keeping you going. That's kind of what's keeping you alive. And I mean that there's quite a bit of that, particularly right at the start of the book, with a leader and the humiliation that she's enduring, and eventually that hint towards suicidal ideation. Now she doesn't act upon it, but we do get a hint that in her darkest moments, that's kind of where she's going.
Mhm. Yes, I would not allow her to do that. But, well, no, I won't give anything away. Let's just say uh, it all evolves in a way that I wasn't quite fully anticipating, but was the only way it could evolve. I want to say one thing, though, for anybody who may be squeamish on the idea of a book narrated by somebody who was a human oddity in a freak show, and she is the narrator, it's first person. We never dwell on what her physical problems are. I knew that I didn't want to do that. And when we get to the end, you get just enough of an idea, but it isn't development. And it's not necessary that you just have to know that it was so severe that it made her the star of the Carnival tenement. But if anybody thinks, ooh, I don't want to read something like this, let me assure you, I'm not going to rub your face. It's not that kind of story.
Well, I did think as I was reading it did have that Texas Chainsaw Massacre effect, that it's like actually what we're doing is we're hinting at the extremity, but we're not revealing it. And so sometimes you've got that less is more, because you in not saying what it is, then actually the human mind can come up with something even more grotesque than the actual reality.
Yes, that's one of the traits of our species. We can always go for the most grotesque, more than nature itself would come up with.
Now, I wonder, as a dog lover, and I suspect that the fate of Raphael, and I'm trying to think, how do we say this subtly, but some of the things that happens, or something specific that happens, I imagine that might have been harder for you to write about than, violence or suffering towards human characters. So, I mean, what do you do in those situations where you realize something unfortunate is going to befall a dog?
I just hope the implication here isn't that I'm a sadist, but at least I'm not an animal abuser. So
Those are your words, Dean. I didn't say that.
okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah,
You've clarified in every single conversation that you're not a sociopath. And I think that's a little bit too much clarification for someone who isn't. So let's let the listeners decide.
I was going to open our conversation by assuring you that I still haven't murdered anyone, but now I think it's probably not necessary to say that. And remember when I'm writing a scene with a dog and it could go very south, my dog is right here. And I think her level of intelligence is higher than any scientist familiar with canines would tell us it is the case, because she's much smarter in many ways than I ever imagined. So I think she would know if what I was doing to that animal, and then our relationship would suffer. So that also guides me. But yeah, there are moments when writing a novel that are harder than others, and some of them can be just as emotional for me as it can be for the reader.
And talking about those difficult moments, what would you say that through writing The Friend of the Family you learned about writing, or what did you learn about yourself through writing this?
I'm not so sure what I learned about myself. Maybe I think I did learn that I've learned this in stages. that if an idea comes to me for something that I should write, but that I'm not sure how it's going to be received by agents, publishers, and ultimately audiences, I used to spend more time dwelling on that. And I think what I learned in this one was I stopped caring. I have to feel that I'm doing what is at the moment the thing I can do most effectively and that I can do the best, and then go with it. And it seems odd to have taken a long life to have gotten over entirely that feeling of, oh, I don't want to disappoint people. Well, I don't want to disappoint people, but I think what I learned in this book, because it has received a wonderful reaction from publishers and everything. Now, it still is the public to tell me whether they like it or not. But I think I finally got to that point of saying, I should have maybe even earlier than I have stopped worrying about that and just say, do the best you can and free yourself from all concern about it. And the book will write more easily than it does when you're concerned too much about what people are going to think of it. Because this book wrote very, very smoothly for me. As I said, using the language well is always very difficult, and you're always catching yourself in moments of failure. But this one was never a book that I wondered if it was working. And often I do wonder whether it's working. So I gained a little extra self-confidence in writing this book, I would say. And that paid off in the one that followed it. And I hope it pays off in the one I'm working on now.
Yeah, I think something that's greatly admirable is even if you have had moments of self doubt, even if you've kind of anticipated, oh goodness, how are people going to react to this? You've throughout your career and throughout your life always advocated for yourself. I mean, I think it was when you were 25 that your agent at the time said, oh, well, I think you're going to only be a mid-list orphan. I'm sure he didn't phrase it quite as bluntly as that, although maybe he did. But you said, well, I disagree with that, and we're going to have to part ways. And you've also had moments where publishers have tried to put you in certain genre boxes. They've tried to market you in different ways. And, you've rejected it, and you've always stood up for who you are and what you're writing. And so I think there's a tremendous amount that people can learn and can take away from that.
Thank you. And that agent, whom I remained friendly with until he just passed away a couple of years ago, that he was that blunt. He said, "You're trying to be more of a success than you can be. You're always going to be a mid-list writer." And it struck me as impossible to be 25 years old and being told what the rest of your life would be like. You had to take some risk. And he wasn't a bad person. He was actually a very sweet person. I liked him very much, but we had to part. And we stayed in touch, and he was, to his credit, he was very pleased that I went on to be more successful than he had ever thought, and that he lost out on 10 or 15% of that. He didn't care. It was just being happy he was a good person. But yeah, my publisher on this says, in the little note she put in the front of the advance proof, she said the book surprised her. She's always used to being surprised at what I deliver, but this was sort of the last thing she expected to receive. But that's good in a way. I think when you stop surprising people, it's probably because you're dead. and I don't intend to retire until the coroner convinces me I'm dead. So I still have a few books in me, I think, and I hope to continue to surprise myself.
Yeah, and another thing from kind of back in the day was I remember you telling us that your wife essentially gave you 5 years to become a writer and said, "Right, if you can't make it in 5 years, then essentially you can't make it." And so you did make it, and here you are. But I'm wondering, because we haven't quite gone into the detail on this, what was it that you did during those 5 years? And what if you were to do it now, or what if someone were to do it now, would you advise they do? Because I think perhaps the climate has changed quite drastically, that what you did might not necessarily be what you would recommend someone does now if they have a 5-year deadline to make it as a writer.
The whole publishing world has changed so dramatically, and not for the better. It's when Julia made that offer to me, "I'll support you for 5 years, and if you can't make it in 5, you'll not make it." I made mistakes. I didn't have the confidence to immediately break out into something more ambitious. I started writing short science fiction novels because that was mostly what I was reading as a kid, or exclusively what I was reading up to a certain age. And as a consequence, that's what I started writing. And I was able to sell it. And then it wasn't making enough money. So I got into some level of panic in that situation. And so then I started writing. I had an editor or a publisher who was publishing my science fiction paperback say, "You ought to write these women's Gothic romances because they really sell and we need a whole bunch of those." And I wrote a few of those, and I watered down what I could have been doing out of a kind of desperation to be sure we would stay afloat and I might be able to make those that's 5 years with a viable career. If I had it to do over again, I would have focused on more ambitious things earlier on and realized I was making the mistake of writing like pulp writers had written back in the day. That I would have changed and I would have done it much differently. But on the other hand, the struggle was something that when I saw what life would be like if I wrote only those paperback originals in strict genre formats, I realized that it took me a couple of years, but I realized this was a dead end. And I had to start upping my game. And so I spent those years trying to learn how to do that. And when you come from a background like mine, you don't necessarily have the self-confidence to say, "Oh, I'm going to write the next great American novel." And as a consequence, you're always just upping your game in little increments. If somebody was trying to do what I did now, it wouldn't work. The mass market paperback is now completely gone. I just saw a news story. The distribution of mass market is done. It's not going to be distributed anymore. Now, that ruined the publishing business because so many readers came in at that price point and they could afford to pay, well, early on $5, early on 50 cents for a paperback. Eventually it was $8 and $10 when I was there. But publishers now they say it was distributors who killed the mass market, but I had two different very major publishers tell me in very no argumentative terms, almost gloating, that we're going to kill the mass market paperback because the price point isn't satisfying. And we're going to force people into a $15, $16, $17 price point by putting them all into trade paperbacks. I know that was publishing intention, and they did it, but it didn't actually work. Some people came along to buy the trade paperbacks, but many didn't. because it was too big a leap. And ebooks made up for some of that, but not nearly for all of it. And the one thing about the mass markets, not to get into inside baseball kind of stuff, but one thing about the mass market paperbacks were that they were so cheap to produce that when I started out and they were selling it like $5.95 at my early days, and in those days it cost 20 cents to print and ship a paperback at that time. And even by the time they had gotten up to selling for $8 and $10, it was only 35 cents because processes of production had improved. And so when you're selling a $10 item that's costing 35% to 35 cents to print and ship, you've got a very huge margin there. And I think they all should have been happy with that. Now, I, as a best-selling writer, got a 15%. So at the $10 price point, I got $1.50. They were paying, let's be generous and say, 50 cents to print and ship. There's $2. They gave a 45% discount to most accounts. So that left out of it all about $3, $3.50 of profit, or profit prior to office expense and all that. That is amazing when you're selling hundreds of millions of paperbacks a year were being sold. And it was, I think, a key mistake in the industry. So now, but what was great, I'm wandering a little, what was great was the investment in a new writer that they brought in paperback wasn't that big. So if you screwed up and you wrote some books that didn't sell because you were fumbling and learning, that was okay. They would buy another one and they'd bring you along. But now they don't bring you along. You have a few opportunities to succeed. And if that doesn't work, you're out the door, or you have to publish forever under a pen name. Or, and the other downside of this, you'll see somebody in self-publishes onto Kindle, and some influencer somewhere that hasn't a lot of followers comes in and starts pushing the heck out of this, and the book starts selling. Then New York publishers come along and buy those books that were self-published and put them out with all this promotion, but don't even edit them or copy edit them. I bought some of these and been astonished to see them full of errors of syntax and grammar. And I said to my agent, what is this? And he said, well, it's a lot easier to buy books that are already finished and selling and just repackage them in different covers and reach out to an audience. Well, that's not good publishing either. So I don't know what to say to young writers trying to come up. It's a tougher world than it was then.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of writers get a so-called lucky break from independent and self-publishing being picked up by these bigger publishers. But as you say, the lucky break was only when they went viral because some influencer or somebody put this out into the collective consciousness, and so everyone was aware of it. But if they'd have taken a chance and taken that to the publisher with kind of no real audience or sales, and they'd have said, no, we're not going to take a chance on it. So I feel in many ways, and it is obviously speaking in generalization, so not exclusively, but a lot of publishers have become safer. They don't want to take chances. They don't want to take a risk. They're just putting out what they feel to be a guarantee or something that's along the lines of a formula that has proven itself beforehand. So it's a bit of a problem for creativity and experimentalism.
Well, let's just hope that artificial intelligence doesn't replace writers. Uh,
I
I
yeah,
believe that.
it's a big topic at the moment, and there's a lot of fear surrounding it. But I don't think that it will. I mean, simply because what AI by definition lacks is that soul and that heart and that human experience. Um, I think AI is a threat to a number of industries and to a number of jobs, but in terms of just pure creative fiction, I think what a lot of us readers are after is that human connection and that human experience. I think one problem I'm seeing very recently, like literally this last week or so, people talking about it, is beforehand you would find somebody, perhaps you're down the pub and there's this guy who's like, oh, I've got an idea for a story. He's like, but I don't have any time to write it. But now AI is allowing these people to put a prompt into it, and then they have a story. It's not a very good story, but then I don't know, it's creating this group of false writers, all these people who they believe they're a writer, but they haven't put any work into it to become a writer to begin with.
It's you just said something I said to somebody on an interview not very long ago. The subject of um, AI or AGI particularly came up, uh, and I said, for all that it might one day do and everything else, the one thing it lacks is soul. And you borrow that from the music business. Music works if it has soul. I even think that AI could potentially be more successful in music than in producing fiction, uh, because I've heard songs in which AI wrote the music and with guidance generated the words and can do the voice. But I think that is much more simplified than a novel, and it can't sustain. I don't believe it can sustain. I may be whistling in the dark, but I don't believe it can sustain novel length in any way that would not sooner than later in the course of reading it alert you to the fact that some sort of stupid machine is writing this that thinks it's smarter than it is.
Right. And when we were talking to Chuck Palahniuk, he was saying one of the things with, writing fiction, one of the good points is that human error. And that's something that AI can't replicate, having human error, that there's something, attractive about that. There's perfection within the imperfection.
Yeah, and I just think there's the machine can read about, it can scan, it can scan and store enormous amounts of information, and there is a certain amount of what we might call learning involved there. But as to move from that to coming up with circumstances and situations that are fresh and interesting, I think is almost impossible for that kind of thinking. Uh, for instance, I read this book, I mentioned it in my blogger newsletter, called The Award, and it's written by Matthew Pearl. And I was sent a copy, and I just loved the book because it's so true about the literary community, what it has to say, and it's not terribly flattering. And as a consequence, I don't think, unless I have never seen anyone write about the subject of literary awards and publishing quite as he did in this book. And until an AI could scan that book, it couldn't write that book. And then it could only write a different version of that book. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm fortunately old enough that AI, I may one day have an AI doctor who pulls the plug on me, but I don't think the AI writer will undo my career.
Oh my goodness. I hope it doesn't get to the point where where our lives are literally in the hands of AI. Like, I mean, medical services, the money going into them, it's not what it once was. But I really hope we're not going to outsource it. Here's your AI doctor. It's like I think I'll take my chances on this one. I'm just not going to go
I've
to
seen
that doctor.
a number of doctors are using AI to explain to their patients. And I've heard where the doctor sits there and starts the computer up, and they both sit next to the computer. I probably would find another doctor after that, but because I think I go back to Stephen Hawking, because I'm pretty sure it was Stephen Hawking who said the reason we've been listening for decades for other life in the universe and don't hear any is because at a certain point, all civilizations create AI and it destroys them. So I hope he was wrong about that, but you do have to wonder.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. And I saw you recommending, of course, the award by Matthew Pearl. And, not only did you recommend it, but it's the first time you have recommended a book in your newsletter. So I will certainly be picking that one up. And I mean, what an endorsement to almost break your own rule of not recommending. I don't know if it was a literal rule that you had, but you've been doing the newsletter for a fair amount of time. So there
Yeah.
has to be something good in the award for you
I
to
was
suddenly
taken by
recommend it.
I was taken by surprise by that book. It's very hard when you've read literally thousands of books and you've written as many as I have. It's hard to pick up something and find something new in it. And I certainly did in this. It's a very cheeky book, and I like that quite a lot.
Well, we are coming up to the time that we have together, but something that you mentioned a number of episodes back, and I can't believe that I didn't ask anything further on it, but when you were talking about being signed by Amazon, you said that every other publisher either didn't have a marketing plan for you or it was 1 or 2 pages, but Amazon had a 40-page marketing plan. Can you give us any insight as to what was in this marketing plan?
It was, they really know how to use the internet and social media. And so it's not just, we'll go to BookBub or we'll go here. It's just dozens of things that they plan to do and core interesting. It's very difficult to explain, except to say that they go everything from a page in the New York Times book review to they saturate the social media platforms and come up with clever new things to do, and of course they have you do it for them or with them, and it was sometimes it's a little more involving than I want, but on the other hand, it has worked, and it's been interesting because you almost have to start opening yourself to the social media, even whether it's what you want to do or not, because other ways of promoting books have slowly disappeared. There used to be lots of newspapers that reviewed fiction. There are very few now. And you used to be able to go on different television shows that would have authors on as well as Hollywood people, but that's withered away too. So it's, you may say, well, I don't want to sit around writing social media posts and I don't want to do that. But once you start doing it, and I write my Instagram posts and stuff myself, it's a little challenge. It's interesting to try to write something succinct and amusing or informative. And I think in one way, I got used to it by saying in a way this sharpens your writing ability, and makes you more succinct. So that there's a plus to it. But I'd have to show you the marketing plan to explain it, and I'm not going to do that.
There you go. There's a NDA perhaps, or perhaps it's just like, no, I have my limits and
Yeah.
you're not getting to see it. You get published by Amazon if you want to see the marketing plan.
Basically, it comes down to this, Michael. As much as I like you and Bob, get your own damn marketing plan.
There you go. That is the soundbite. And if you could only be on one social media platform, which one would you go for? And equally, if you were recommending to new writers the social media platform for them to invest most of their time into, which would it be?
You're asking the wrong guy. I just write the posts, I give them to them, and they do with it all what they know to do. I have no idea. I never go online myself. Except technically we're sort of online now by doing podcasts, but it's I don't surf the web, and I let Linda do all that. I know myself just to being I would just I would be sucked into it. I'm that kind of person, and so it's why I don't gamble. It's why I only drink wine. I don't tempt myself to fall away into anything else but my nice, tight little life that I keep control of.
And can you confirm if you only drink wine, as in literally that's your only drink, or if you meant the only alcohol?
I don't drink water, actually.
You just survive on wine.
I've said that you bathe in water and you flush the toilet with it, so it isn't something to drink. And so I drink wine and sodas, anything flavored water, that's all different. But water without flavoring is repellent. So now I'm revealing too many things about myself that people will find odd. Although I imagine people already find a great deal odd about me.
Well, we best wrap up before I get you to divulge too many secrets. So thank you again for a wonderful conversation and for writing a remarkable book that I really think is going to appeal to so many readers, both within horror and genre and beyond.
No, we will see. And I'm not not intending any self-harm if it doesn't work. I want to assure you of that.
Well, I mean, after the allusions to suicidal ideation in the book, this is a massive relief for you to confirm after 1 hour that you won't personally be indulging in such behaviors.
I wanted you to sleep well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners and viewers with?
Okay. At my age, final thoughts is too ominous a phrase. So I would just say, be happy, don't worry, have a good life.